In a shirt, he's only a bloke. In a suit, he's just a reporter. But in his pajamas, he is incredibly strong, and he also can fly.
Hello! So I got that from Man of Steel, and I really enjoyed myself, and I thought, right, I'm going to go online, I'm going to find out what everyone's been saying, and then I'm going to make a video of it. And then I went, wait a minute. Because haven't we learned over the last few years that if you've had an experience that you enjoy and you want to continue enjoying that, then the last thing you want to do is go on the internet and find out what everybody else says about it, because that's just going to suck all the fun out of it and you're going to come out at the other end thinking you hated it as well. But I wanted to read about it, I just had this exciting time at the cinema, I wanted to see what people thought. So I had an idea as to what I can do. I am going to start making response videos, but I'm going to do them in two parts. Firstly, I'm going to say what I honestly thought coming out of it, and then I'm going to talk about what I've learned from reading what people have said about it on the internet. Because I am quite a suggestible person and possibly an idiot. It's entirely possible that everything I think before I've read about other people's opinions is stupid and wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my initial, original, real opinion down on video, and then I'm going to see if the internet can change my mind by being more right than I am.
Who's that in the sky? I don't know. If I had to guess, Superman! Who's that in the sky? I don't know, but it's probably gonna be Superman! Can you change my mind?
Are the chances immense or minuscule? Bear with me.
Internet, can you change my mind? Are you suitably cross and cynical?
Warning, there may be spoilers in this video. I'm not setting out to drop all the spoilers, but it might happen, so skip it if you're bothered. Okay, Man of Steel then. I'll start in the obvious place, the character of Superman himself. This is a completely different take on Superman in one important respect, because in all the previous versions of Superman that I've seen, and I'm not that versed in Superman lore, but I've seen a few things. I've seen the Christopher Reeve films, various cartoons, the New Adventures series in the 90s, which isn't the real name of the series, and I know it's a bit lame, but to me Lois and Clark sounds less like a description of the series and more like its shipping category. In all those versions, Superman is depicted as having a personality that's about as super as his physical powers. He's impossibly good. His kindness and upstanding wholesomeness is unlimited and almost magical, just like his physical powers. There are good reasons given for that, depending on who you ask, but that's the fact of it. But here, he's a human. This film is all about asking what might happen if humans really were confronted with the Superman story as a reality. Part of that is addressing what it would be like to be the person who has the powers. He grows up raised by just people. Good people, but just people, and surrounded by other people. And the result is a Clark Kent who is a good man, but a flawed and human one. They don't take this very far, don't go in expecting a Superman who shoots people before learning to control his anger. It isn't that. But he feels more like a plausible man, I thought, than the Christopher Reeve version, who was more like a kind of an Archie character come to life. Boy Scout is the word that everyone uses for Superman, and that was true. And here it isn't. And to go with him, we get a new take on Lois Lane as well. She's always been cool. Her position as an investigative reporter has usually been used as a sort of a super sleuth role. She's always uncovering crimes and getting a few punches of her own in as well. I remember being impressed by how active and undamselly she is in the old Fleischer cartoons, for instance. But that's taken to a kind of new extreme here by the way that she's introduced. See, in previous versions of Superman, we usually introduced to Lois in the offices of the Daily Planet, or something similar. And so we kind of think of that as her home base. And so at the end of every adventure, we expect to go back there and find her there. We expect her to go home to there. But here, she's more of an on-location character. She's helicoptering out to an Arctic location to investigate people who don't really want to be investigated. And the result is that, to me at least, in this film, the Daily Planet felt like the environment she was less at home in. I personally felt more comfortable seeing her out on the field. Now that might always have been part of her character, but this was the first time that I as a viewer was made to feel it. Now, I actually hadn't seen the Christopher Reeve films until very recently. I basically watched them in the run-up to this film coming out. And one of the things that I noticed watching those films, and particularly the first one, without the lens of already loving it, is that a lot of the things in the story are kind of unclear and go unexplained. One of the big ones being kryptonite. I really didn't know what was going on with that by the end of the film, which is the issue of why Superman is weak against kryptonite. I mean, it's always well established that he is weak against it, but I'm never really quite sure why. Now, this is going to be a bit of a spoiler, so shut me up if you don't want to hear this, but they actually don't do kryptonite in this film exactly. They do the kind of story that led to the invention of kryptonite as a plot device, and in it they explain quite well why Superman would be weakened by coming into contact with Krypton stuff. It makes sense, it works, and most interestingly, weakening Superman isn't just a way to have a big chunk of the movie go on without any superhero special effects. In fact, it's used in a way that I was really excited about, in that it goes both ways. I won't go into any more specific details than that, but in this film, the equivalent of kryptonite can be, and is, turned against the person who's using it on Superman in a really interesting way. Then there's General Zod and his pals. Why are they evil? In the first film, you get a scene at the beginning, which kind of explains it, but not really, and then in the second film, they just show up and a pantomime villain's going, ha ha ha. Whereas in this film, you get a good sense of why they're doing what they're doing. They're still pantomime villains, and they're way more evil, and they're way more destructive, but you can kind of get why, which was, I thought, missing from the Christopher Reeve films. Perhaps I just didn't watch them clearly enough, but I haven't had the, decades to work out in my head what it's all about that some other viewers have. Whereas with this one, just within one sitting, I knew what was going on. And then there's another point, which is the point about Lois Lane's investigative prowess. Now, it might shock you to learn this, but it's me! In all other versions of Superman that I've seen, it's usually Superman who has to tell Lois Lane, the world's greatest investigative journalist, which in this context means detective, that he's Superman. Or Clark Kent, depending on which face he has on at the time. But no, it's always the same face, it's just whether or not he's got his glasses on, and it's really not... Oh, and he twirls his hair a little bit, that's another thing he does. This film solves that. I won't tell you how, but it solves it. Now then, action. Doubtless anyone who has said anything about this film has told you about how action-packed it is, and that it's just completely full of super punching, and it definitely is. Yeah, this film is full of super fights. And this is the only time I've ever really been convinced that what I'm looking at is a representation of what would happen if super gods had a fight on Earth. I've been shown the concept several times, and the obvious comparison is the Avengers. I'm sorry to say, I wasn't as impressed with the Avengers as a lot of you seem to be. That's not to say I didn't enjoy it, I did. I can't think of anything in it that made me think, oh, I'm not enjoying this. But at the same time, I can't say that anything in the film really excited me the way that, say, Iron Man did. And the reason for that is that even though the characters were completely nailed, the writing and the cast and their performances were all great, the part that didn't convince me was the action. It was guided, it was clean. Here's an alien. Okay, well, first Captain America will biff him with his shield, and now here comes the Hulk. It's his turn. Now he's gonna punch him. Then the alien turns to Black Widow, and she does the stuff Black Widow does, whatever that is. Meanwhile, in the background, there's a city being invaded by aliens, and there's no sense that it's actually gonna destroy any of it. And we're gonna see a heavily scripted ballet of muscle and snark. But in this film, it is God versus God. Never mind when he punches something, when Superman so much as flies away, there's a huge atmospheric thud, because this is an extreme being who doesn't fit on Earth. If Superman and Zod high-fived, all the windows in the area would just explode. But they're not high-fiving, they're beating each other to death, and I've never seen a better expression of that than in this film. It's wild, it's intense, it's smash and buildings erupting, and that's exactly what would happen if two superheroes fought in a human city. The city would be demolished. It wouldn't be the heroes' friends that we know in the film as main characters looking scared in precarious situations and hanging off things waiting to get saved. No, it'd be widespread annihilation, and that's what we see here. And it's really intense, it really looks like what it's depicting. Now, before I saw this film, I was already aware that it was being compared to the Dark Knight trilogy, partly because of Christopher Nolan's involvement, but also because the trailers kind of painted it in that light. And it's definitely similar. They play up the influence rather than trying to hide it. There is a difference, though, and I think it's an interesting one. See, the Dark Knight films were about a corrupt city full of corrupt people, and nice people like Harvey Dent and Rachel were shining lights, rare things buried under the heaps of unpleasant or corrupt people in society. Now, that corrupt society was limited to within a single city, but so was the whole film. It was more or less the entire universe of the film. So it might as well have been saying that humanity as a whole is corrupt in that way. Compare that to Man of Steel. As far as I remember, all the human characters in Man of Steel are shown as being actively good. It's practically the opposite situation. This superhero grows up in a world where good people are the norm. In fact, the closest thing we get to bad people in the film are 3 or 4 child bullies, one of which, the only one that the film really focuses on personally in any detail, turns out to be a decent guy. The response to Superman's presence on Earth is that a military force confront him, take him into custody, and so on and so on. And in all of those bits, the men representing the military at every turn are civil and polite, acting on their reasonable fear, not by yelling and, firing guns everywhere, but by addressing Superman pleasantly, striking a pretty perfect balance between trying to do what little they can to protect Earth from an invading force, and extending a hand of friendship to it. They only slip up briefly, thinking that they should probably shoot at Superman as well as the bad guys as soon as the super fighting breaks out, and well, fair enough. But very soon after that, as soon as Superman has essentially established that he really is on their side, they immediately lower their guns and they recognise that Superman's not their enemy. And that struck me as a very pleasant breath of fresh air, especially after things like like the Transformers films, where alien threats are responded to by the military, but in a very, tanks and guns kind of a way. Here they had chat. Toby got to join in, it was lovely. And then there's Zack Snyder. I was genuinely surprised when I got to the end of the film and directed by Zack Snyder came up on the screen. I'd forgotten, and the thing is, I only really know, I'm not that versed in Snyder. I know him from Watchmen. I saw his Dawn of the Dead, but it was so long ago I can't really remember, and I haven't seen 300 yet, so basically I know him from Watchmen, and well, I didn't hate that film like a lot of people do. I just find it a really interesting film because it was made, and it seems to stand defiant, to everything that anyone involved in allowing a film to be made would ask to happen to the film, especially in its extended form. Have you seen that thing? So I didn't hate Watchmen, but I certainly recognise its excesses. All that slow motion stuff really did take fetishizing violence to a new extreme that was at odds with the source material. And yeah, it makes the whole film seem sort of stupid. Unless you factor in that one scene that you only get in the extended cut where the slow motion stuff suddenly stops as soon as one of the quote-unquote hero characters dies, which I choose to view as proof that the slow-mo fetish violence stuff is in fact the characters glorifying their own deranged damage acts in their own heads, because if you look at it that way, then it makes the film a more enjoyable experience, whether it's the intended reading or not. Anyway, Watchmen was a particular thing, and that's the style I've come to associate with Snyder's name. So to see his name at the end of this film, having forgotten that he directed it, came as quite a pleasant surprise. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that because the violence is in any way turned down in this film. No, it's turned way up compared to Watchmen. The violence in this film is unreal, it's incredible, it's immense. But it's in context, and it's not in slow motion. There isn't a lick of slow motion anywhere in this film that I can remember. In fact, it's incredibly fast, it's surprisingly fast, alarmingly fast. I think we live in this era where the violence in films, a lot of the time, is shown in slow motion, and I've kind of come to the understanding that that's because each punch and each explosion costs a lot of money, and they essentially just need to do them more slowly so that there's fewer of them in the film. And it may well be that each punch costs a lot of money in this film because every single collision anywhere in the film causes a huge reaction in the whole world around them. Streets crack, buildings collapse and explode and crumble everywhere, and even the air does sorts of particle effect things that I don't understand, but presumably you have to pay big teams of people to make happen. So I'm guessing all of that costs a lot of money, but there is no sense that they tried to keep the amount of hits in the film down. They keep coming. I think it feels like the last hour of the film is nothing but punch, 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 big explosions, like one per second or more. I genuinely thought that I was watching the big climactic final fight scene 3 times during the course of this film, and looking back, the first time I thought it must only have been halfway through the film. And they just basically don't stop from that point. So yeah, violence-wise, this film makes any previous Superman film into a twee cartoon. But that's the way it should be, because with all previous Superman films, I've always had the sense that they just couldn't do what life with Superman in it would really look like. I mean, think back to the most impressive set pieces from any previous Superman film, and now, having seen Man of Steel, they feel like they're floating in this void of space, just parenthesized with empty scenes of characters walking about and sharing dialogue, which is, good stuff to have in films. That's how you build character, and honestly, this film could have done with more of that. But this film has changed my brain temporarily. Like, thinking back to those old films, what used to be characterization and dialogue and so on, has started feeling like the drawn-out bits between the few action shots they could afford, because Superman, he's a god who's fighting things, and that should be overwhelming. At least once it should be overwhelming, and I felt like in this story that was appropriate, because here was a story about equally powerful beings coming and trying honestly to kill everyone on Earth, and I won't spoil it, but the thing they're doing to kill everyone, it kind of gave me flashbacks to how, Independence Day felt when you were a kid and things like that. This idea of devastation on a huge scale, and there's just nothing that anybody can do. And while I'm thinking about it, by the way, the sound effects team I hope they get something for this film, because the sound in this thing was incredible. There's a big weapon, and the sound it makes is really good. Obviously, it depends what cinema you're in and what the sound setup's like, but where I was, it was good. These sounds are the sounds I was making when I came out of this film. You know, I get that it's silly and that I'm a stupid man for being excited by big punchy men, but I'm usually not. That's the kind of thing, you know, ask my friends, they'll tell you, usually I'm a bit sneery about things like that. You know, an action film has to have a certain amount of other stuff in it to interest me, but this time it was just punching, and it really excited, and I came out going, whoa! So yeah, happy. I enjoyed this film, and having just watched all the other Superman films, well, that's a wide topic, but all the Christopher Reeve ones, and then that one they did recently that was like a sequel to the Christopher Reeve ones, having seen all of those recently, this one I enjoyed far more. And now to have that joy crushed out of me by the internet. Let's see if the internet can change my mind.
Are the chances immense or minuscule? Internet, can you change my mind? Are you suitably cross